The year was 2137, and for the first time in human history, things seemed to be moving in the right direction. After decades of struggle, war, and climate recovery, humanity had stepped beyond Earth's boundaries. Cities bloomed across the surface of Mars, buried beneath protective domes. Under Europa's icy crust, research teams studied the mysterious ocean world. Even in the distant system of Proxima Centauri, the colony of New Terra had taken root, a quiet outpost lit by a small red sun. Life wasn't perfect, but it was hopeful. Nations had learned to work together, at least in space. Humanity had found purpose again in the stars, building, exploring, learning. Most believed that if they had finally reached beyond the cradle of Earth, the universe would be filled with wonder. Few expected it to be filled with war. The arrival was sudden. One moment, the night sky looked as it always had: stars, satellites, and the faint shimmer of space stations orbiting Earth. The next, something changed. Astronomers were the first to notice a slight distortion in orbit, a shimmer near the moon. Then the distortion grew. Without warning, a fleet of enormous alien ships decloaked above Earth, casting shadows across continents. Massive dark vessels with smooth metallic surfaces and impossible angles hovered in silence. Communication channels were flooded with a single message in hundreds of languages, translated instantly: submit or be erased. Panic spread faster than light. Within minutes, governments scrambled to respond. The United Earth Defense Network tried to send ships to intercept. Fighter crafts launched from orbital platforms, but they were like birds flying into a storm. The alien fleet didn't move. It simply responded. In seconds, brilliant beams of controlled energy rained down on Earth. Cities lit up and vanished: Beijing, Chicago, Lagos, Sao Paulo. They weren't destroyed randomly. Each was chosen to prove a point. Precision strikes, no waste. The Zarelian Empire didn't want resources, territory, or negotiation. They wanted silence. Their attack wasn't war, it was a message. Earth had been noticed, and in the vast scale of the galaxy it was considered weak, unimportant, and now broken. The skies turned red with fire. Satellites failed. Communication lines collapsed. Earth fell into darkness, not because it was entirely destroyed, but because it had been crippled. The invaders left just enough alive for the survivors to tell the story. Entire nations were gone. Others were barely hanging on. People ran, hid, prayed, fought, but none of it mattered. The Zarelians didn't come to talk. They came to remind humanity that space belonged to them. And for now, Earth had been dismissed. Like a child trying to play in a world of giants. But somewhere in the chaos on the edge of the Martian colony, aboard a small defense vessel called Odyssea, single human was captured. His name was Captain Elias Monroe. He had ordered his crew to flee when it became clear that the battle was lost. He stayed behind to cover their retreat, holding the line alone for as long as he could. When his ship was finally disabled, the Zarelians boarded, expecting to find fear. Instead, they found defiance. Captain Monroe was taken alive, the only human known to be captured during the invasion. The Zarelians didn't understand the significance of this action. To them, he was simply one more subject to study. One more species to classify and catalog. But to humanity, it was different. News of his capture spread like a spark through the remaining colonies and underground resistance cells. People clung to the story. One of us is still out there. It was not just a prisoner. He was a symbol. On Earth, among the ruins, survivors began whispering his name. On Mars, in bunkers beneath the red dust, engineers began building again, to explore, but to fight. On Europa, scientists encrypted messages to the stars, searching for allies, or perhaps ways to strike back. The flame of humanity had been almost extinguished, but it hadn't died. It had become something sharper, colder, focused. The Zarelians believed they had sent a message, but in doing so, they had awakened something ancient and dangerous: human determination. They had struck Earth first, but they had made one mistake. They had taken one of us alive, and humanity does not forget. Captain Elias Monroe sat in silence, his wrists bound by thin bands of glowing metal, his body floating weightless inside a containment sphere aboard a Xerelian dreadship orbiting far from any human world. The air around him was sterile, cold, and still. No sounds, no movement. Nothing but the hum of strange energy that kept him suspended in the center of the chamber like an insect caught in glass. The Xerelians believed this was the perfect prison, no corners to hide in, no walls to touch, no surface to feel. Their technology read thoughts, tracked heartbeats, and adjusted the environment to suppress physical resistance. But they had never captured a human before, and what they didn't understand was that human strength had never come from muscle or weapons. It came from something deeper. When Elias had first been brought aboard, the aliens had approached him. Like scientists studying a strange animal, their tall, thin frames moved with grace, their skin shimmering like silver under the artificial light. They didn't speak with mouths, but communicated directly into his mind, using pulses of thought, images, and commands. They wanted answers: how many humans were left, where they were hiding, what weapons they had, what their plans were. Elias said nothing. He didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't even ask questions. He just stared at them with the same calm, steady look that had once led an entire Martian fleet. His silence wasn't just resistance, it was defiance. The Xerelian interrogators escalated their methods. They used memory extractors to pull fragments of his past images of his childhood on Earth, his academy training, brief glimpses of old friends. A Martian sunrise, but the machine kept failing when it tried to go deeper. His thoughts scattered. Like smoke, his mind slipping through their neural probes like water through fingers. They introduced neural feedback loops, designed to overwhelm human senses, bombarding his brain with conflicting stimuli, hoping to cause breakdown or surrender. But Elias endured. He floated in their prison for days, maybe weeks, without food, without sleep, without light. Still, he didn't speak. They studied his vitals in confusion. His heart was strong, his mind resistant to their manipulation. Human neurology, they reported, was unstable, illogical, primitive. But there was something else too, something they hadn't expected, a kind of mental resilience that refused to fold under pressure. Xerelian scholars became fascinated by him. They couldn't understand how such a simple biological system could resist so many layers of advanced psychological techniques. They called him the constant variable, the unpredictable element, in an otherwise precise system. Whispers began to spread among the ship's crew. The human will not break. Far away, in the darkness beyond Xerelian patrol routes, scattered pieces of humanity were beginning to stir. News of Captain Monroe's capture had reached hidden channels coded. Messages traveling through old mining relays, bouncing between abandoned satellites and secret listening posts. The Ember signal, as they called it, had survived inside a piece of Elias's last transmission, a single line embedded in static. Difficult to detect but unmistakable once decrypted, they struck Earth first. Make sure it's the last mistake they ever make. Cross the belt, deep inside asteroid bunkers, engineers and former soldiers reactivated long-dormant systems. On rogue colonies hidden in gas giant shadows, stealth ships powered up again for the first time in years. And in underground labs on Mars, scientists who had once built probes and greenhouses now designed things with sharper edges. Humanity had never been united for long, but now, scattered and wounded as they were, they found common ground in memory, in grief, and in Elias's final words. No one knew exactly where he was, but the message was clear: he was still out there. As long as he was, the fight wasn't over. Meanwhile, back aboard the dread ship, something had changed. Elias began to smile, not often, not broadly, but just enough to make the Xerelian observers uneasy. They couldn't detect a signal, but they sensed purpose. A shift in his posture, focus in his eyes. It wasn't rebellion, it was planning. They increased security. More guards, tighter controls, more experiments. But every attempt to unlock his thoughts only made his silence louder. Eventually, some of the interrogators refused to work with him. They claimed he was infecting the ship not with weapons or disease, but with something far more dangerous: uncertainty. Xerelians were creatures of order, of calculation, They relied on outcomes, patterns, and data. But Monroe was chaos-wrapped in flesh, and his presence challenged everything they believed about control. He had become more than a prisoner. He had become a question they couldn't answer. And beyond their reach, that question was echoing louder and louder across human space. Elise's image became a symbol, half in shadow, staring through the visor of a cracked helmet. His name was spoken like a promise. Resistance leaders no longer asked if they could fight. They simply asked how. Pilots trained in hidden caves beneath asteroid crust. Weapons built from scrap and stealth tech were tested in silence. The Ember fleet, still only a whisper, began to take form. Elias had given them time, while the Zarelians obsessed over it. One man, humanity rebuilt itself in the corners of forgotten systems. Some said he would escape. Others believed he would be rescued. Most knew he was already doing what no one else could, holding the attention of a galactic empire with nothing but his will. In the depths of his mind, Elias knew this too. He hadn't given up, not once. He replayed every moment, every face he remembered, every reason he had for staying alive. Not for revenge, not even for survival, but for the simple belief that humanity was not meant to be erased. Not like this, the Zarelians thought they were teaching a lesson. What they didn't know was that humanity was learning faster than they could imagine. And soon, the ones doing the teaching would be the students. Captain Elias Monroe floated in silence. But behind that silence was a storm waiting to be unleashed. Across the shattered edge of human space, where once thriving colonies had been silenced, and orbital stations reduced to floating debris, something unexpected began to rise. Humanity, battered and grieving, had reached the end of its patience. The survivors who had once fled or gone silent began to stir, not out of fear, but out of purpose. On hidden moons and inside the metal bones of forgotten mining stations, scientists, engineers, ex-military operatives, and ordinary civilians came together not under the flag of any one nation, but beneath a single cause: resistance. They called themselves the United Human Resistance, and while they lacked the numbers and scale of the Zarelian Empire, they possessed something far more dangerous: creativity fueled by loss. Their strength was not in size, but in unpredictability. They scavenged parts from ruined colonies, hacked old AI cores, and designed ships that didn't follow standard military templates. These vessels, dark and sharp, were built to vanish, to move unseen, to strike and disappear. With AI-guided navigation systems, quantum cloaks, and weapons designed not to destroy, but to disable, corrupt, and erase, these stealth ships became known in whispers as the Ember Fleet. The name came from the way they moved like embers in the dark. Silent and burning, impossible to track but deadly when they touched anything. Their mission was not to retake lost ground, at least not yet. It was to make the Zarelians feel uncertainty for the first time. Captain Elias Monroe, still held in his orbiting prison deep in enemy territory, had no idea that his final transmission had sparked such a fire. But his image, his silence, and his defiance had become the symbol around which the Ember Fleet formed. While he floated in darkness, Earth's survivors struck back. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't wave flags. They simply arrived, and then vanished. A Zarelian supply station near Saturn vanished without explanation. No distress signal. No survivors, only silence where once a hub had stood. A week later, a patrol ship was found drifting in perfect condition. Its crew unconscious and unharmed, their memories fragmented, their systems wiped clean. Surveillance logs, when recovered, showed a flicker of light, a hum of sound too low. For Zarelian sensors, and then nothing. Panic began to spread quietly within the Empire's command ranks. Reports came in of ships being lost to unknown interference, weapons failing mid-fire, navigation systems turning in on themselves. First, they suspected internal failure. But then a pattern emerged. Every loss occurred near former human territories. Every disappearance left behind strange electromagnetic echoes, and every target was chosen with precision, as if someone had mapped the Empire's weak points from the inside out. The Zarelians had believed the war was over, the moment they broke Earth's defenses. They had seen humanity as fractured and unworthy of a second thought. But now, they were starting to realize the truth that they had awakened something far more dangerous than a conventional enemy. The Ember fleet operated without centralized command, their units linked through secure quantum channels, constantly shifting tactics and strategies. No two attacks were ever the same. Sometimes they hacked into communication arrays and played back the sounds of Earth's ruined cities, causing fear and confusion. Other times they deployed viral nanites that ate through circuits silently, leaving ships dead in space. They didn't just destroy it, they erased, sending a clear message. Humanity had not been defeated, it had been sharpened. These operations weren't just military victories, they were psychological blows. Xerelian captains began to delay patrols, refuse assignments near human zones, and request constant reinforcements for even minor stations. For an empire built on order and control, unpredictability was their greatest weakness, and the Ember fleet thrived on it. On Mars, deep beneath the surface in a facility once used to grow food for a peaceful colony, engineers fine-tuned pulse wave disruptors capable of disabling even the largest Xerelian warships without leaving a trace. On Europa, a group of exobiologists turned their understanding of alien ecosystems into tactical warfare, designing atmospheric manipulators that could turn Xerelian air recyclers into tools of confusion. Even children played a part programming puzzles that, when fed into Xerelian data systems, caused endless logic loops and system crashes. Every human, no matter their skill or age, became part of something bigger. The Ember fleet was not just ships, it was an idea. And that idea had begun to spread faster than the Xerelians could contain it. Meanwhile, hidden deep in Xerelian space, Captain Monroe sat unmoving in his cell, unaware that every moment he resisted had fueled something unstoppable: the prison. Staff changed regularly. Now Xerelian minds weren't used to dealing with something they couldn't fix or explain. They didn't speak of him openly, but the guards glanced nervously at the cell when passing. Some even believed he was responsible for what was happening to their empire, that perhaps human minds held secrets not even their most advanced probes could detect. The silence surrounding him had turned from a sign of defeat into a source of fear, and still he waited, calm, steady. Knowing something had changed, the Ember fleet had no anthem, no official leader, and no borders. It didn't need them. It lived in shadows and code and fire hidden beneath the ice. Humanity once scattered had become a storm, not of noise or chaos, but of precision and quiet rage. What the Xerelians had mistaken for weakness was now cutting through their empire, one system at a time. Deep in the cold black between stars, a new truth had begun to spread, not among humans, but among the empire itself. This enemy learns fast. No one saw him leave. One moment, Captain Elias Monroe was locked inside the Xerelian high-orbit prison, surrounded by advanced alien security, guarded by sentinels trained to recognize even the slightest change in human behavior. The next moment, he was gone. There were no alarms, no explosions, no damage to the station, just an empty containment cell and a trail of confusion. The official reports were useless, filled with glitches and missing data. Some guards whispered that Elias had spoken to them, not in threats or demands, but with quiet questions that made them doubt everything they'd been taught. Others believed the truth was more technical, that Elias had somehow embedded a logic virus in the station's systems, a remnant of Earth's AI wars, something ancient and forgotten that he had hidden in his own mind. Whatever the reason, he escaped, and when the Xerelians searched for him, they found no trace. He didn't run. He returned. Out of the silence, a single signal reached the Ember fleet: no encryption, no codes, just one message: I'm back. The response wasn't sent. It didn't need to be. The moment he stepped aboard the flagship Ashwake, everyone knew something had changed. The man they had looked up to, the man who had resisted where no one else could, was now leading them. And this time, he wasn't asking them to hide. Standing on the bridge, his voice steady and calm, Elias gave his first command not as a prisoner, but as the leader of a movement born from ashes. We're not here to survive, he said. Here to remind them who we are. And with those words, the Ember fleet changed its purpose. It was no longer a ghost in the dark, striking at supply lines and remote posts. Now it turned its gaze toward the heart of the Zarelian Empire. The core world's planet, so heavily guarded that even the idea of attack once seemed impossible, became the next targets. But Elias didn't want destruction. He wanted memory. Every strike was precise, symbolic, and meant to deliver not just damage, but humiliation. In the capital world of Zyros Prime, the grand monument to the Empire's first expansion campaign, a towering spire of crystal and metal collapsed in the middle of the night without a sound. It didn't explode. It simply unraveled, its piece disconnected as if it had never been part of the whole.
Yes.
Erased, data rewritten with ancient Earth poetry and images of the burning cities they once attacked. High-ranking generals disappeared from their fortified homes, their security systems untouched, their fates unknown. And in every case, a small mark was left behind, 2 horizontal lines crossing a vertical one. The symbol of the Ember Fleet, fear, spread faster than truth. The Zarelian Senate, once confident and calm, began holding emergency meetings in undisclosed locations. Their diplomats sent desperate messages through back channels, asking for dialogue, offering apologies, suggesting peace. But humanity didn't respond. The time for talk had long passed. The Zarelians had taken one of Earth's best, and now humanity had taken their pride. And they did it without overwhelming power, without fleets larger than their enemies. They used ideas, tricks, silence, humiliation. It was a kind of warfare the Empire had never faced, one where the goal wasn't victory but reminder. Across the core systems, citizens who once believed in the Empire's perfection began to ask questions. How could a defeated species cause this kind of chaos? How could one man return from an impossible prison and lead a fleet to their most protected planets? Whispers grew louder, doubts spread, and the foundations of Zarelian control began to crack not from the outside, but from within. Elias never raised his voice, never celebrated, never claimed revenge. His presence alone was enough. For the soldiers who followed him, he was more than a symbol. He was proof that humans didn't just survive, they changed, they adapted. When pushed too far, they struck back in ways that were deeper than destruction. Back in the dark corners of space, the Ember Fleet continued its mission. They hit factories, but not with weapons. Instead, they corrupted the output, so Zarelian ships were built with microscopic design flaws, failing in unpredictable ways. They infected their news feeds with recordings of human children reciting stories of Earth, turning their propaganda channels into lessons in history. The Empire's greatest minds were forced to admit something they had never believed before, that they had underestimated the species they had tried to erase. And as more generals fell silent and more monuments vanished, the Zarelians finally understood this wasn't about territory, wasn't even about war. It was about memory, about dignity, about sending a message that could never be erased. 1. Evening, aboard the Ashwake, as stars passed silently outside the windows, Elias stood alone, watching a map of the Empire shrink, system by system. His officers waited for orders, but he gave none. He simply watched, because deep inside he knew what they were all starting to realize: this wasn't the end. This was the turning. And from here, everything would change. They came without warning. Silent and unseen, the Ember Fleet drifting above Zarelia Prime under full cloak, a shadow of vengeance hanging over the Empire's heart. No alarms were triggered, no defense. Systems activated. By the time the Zarelians realized what was happening, it was already far too late. Dozens of human-designed stealth cruisers positioned themselves across the orbit of the most powerful planet in the Empire. Their systems, tuned not for open war, but for something more exact. A single transmission echoed across every channel, every planet, every system, once loyal to Zarelian control. It carried the voice of Captain Elias Monroclia, steady and filled with a calm that held more power than any weapon. "You taught us fear," he began, his words moving through alien halls and command centers, reaching politicians and citizens alike we taught ourselves resolve. You struck Earth first, and now there is no second chance. Silence followed the message, sick, tense, waiting. Then, in a matter of hours, the Empire's war machine began to collapse. Military networks shut down as human-created infiltration codes took over. Shipyards halted production when their AI controllers were rewritten mid-task. Planetary shields failed without a sound, their control towers overridden by invisible programs that spread like wildfire through Xerelian infrastructure. But there was no fire, no mass destruction, no planets turned to ash. The Ember Fleet had not come to destroy, they had come to remove the very idea of Xerelian dominance. As the hours passed, systems that had once proudly worn the Empire's crest began to secede. Governors disconnected from central command. Military officers abandoned their posts or surrendered outright, not because they were beaten by weapons, but because fear had finally reached the ones who thought they could never be touched. On some worlds, statues of Xerelian war heroes were quietly dismantled. On others, local leaders broadcast messages of neutrality, hoping to avoid the fate they had once watched Earth suffer. But Elias did not respond to these gestures. There would be no negotiations, no stage for diplomacy. Peace. This time was not something to be requested. It was something humanity enforced. The Ember Fleet left no trail of rubble, only silence and surrender. And through it all, Elias remained distant, not celebrating, not taking victory for himself, but watching closely to ensure that no part of the Empire remained untouched by the truth of what had happened. Back on Earth, under skies that had once burned, the world was healing. Cities were being rebuilt with materials that combined old-world charm with new technologies learned from war and necessity. Skyscrapers gleamed beside restored stone monuments, and the air once thick with ash was now filled with life. Gardens bloomed where ruins had stood, powered by solar fields and overseen by quiet drones humming above. People returned to what remained of their homes, not to forget what had happened, but to build forward with memory in their hearts. And among them walked Elias, no longer in uniform, no longer a prisoner or a commander, but a quiet man carrying the weight of what had been done and what had been prevented. As he moved through the city, people greeted him with nods, not cheers, a recognition of shared pain and earned peace. Children played in the open, laughing without fear, beside a monument at the city's center, a tall stone pillar holding the broken faceplate of a Xerelian war mask. Beneath it, carved into the base, were 7 words that now defined the future. We were patient, never again. Elias paused in front of the monument, eyes tracing the lines of the inscription. His reflection caught in the metal of the enemy's broken armor. Behind him, life moved forward. Families reunited, markets reopened, music played softly from nearby windows. But in his mind, he could still hear the silence of the cell, still feel the weight of his captor's questions, still see the faces of those lost in the first strike on Earth. He knew that humanity had changed forever, just in strength, but in purpose. The stars were no longer places to fear, but spaces to defend, to watch, and eventually to explore. Again, the Ember Fleet, though still active, had scattered across distant regions, acting not as conquerors, but as guardians, hidden sentinels ensuring that no threat would rise unnoticed again. They didn't need orders now. They moved with a shared understanding, shaped by what had been taken from them, and what they had reclaimed. The Xerelian Empire, once towering and unshakable, had not fallen in a blaze of fire, but had been undone by its own pride, chipped away piece by piece, until nothing remained but memory and regret. And humanity scarred, smaller in number, but stronger in will, stood not as conquerors, but as survivors who had taught the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. As the sun set over the glowing skyline of Earth's capital, Elias turned from the monument and walked slowly into the city, the orange light casting long shadows behind him. And in the silence of that moment, a new age began, not one of patience, but of readiness.